Never Finished, by David Goggins. Introduction. I want to tell you a story. Imagine a man standing on a stage, in front of thousands of combat veterans. He's wearing a crisp suit, a medal hanging around his neck. This isn't just any award, it's the prestigious Americanism Award from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, an honor once given to one of his heroes, Senator John McCain. The crowd is on its feet, applauding. By every measure, this is a moment of triumph, the culmination of a life of honor and service. But the man on stage isn't feeling triumph. He's confused. He feels like a fraud. For over an hour, sitting in the audience between his mother and his uncle, his mind wasn't on the accolades being read from his resume. It was drifting through a dark cave of memories, reliving a childhood of terror, poverty, and abuse. He saw himself as a young boy, beaten by his own father. He saw himself as the only black kid in a small Indiana town, facing down racism from his classmates. He remembered cheating his way through school because of crippling learning disabilities, feeling stupid and worthless. He remembered quitting military training when the water became too terrifying. He remembered the man he became after that, a nearly 300-pound exterminator working the graveyard shift, his spirit crushed, his dreams dissolving. He shouldn't be here. That's the thought looping in his mind. The man the world sees now, the decorated Navy SEAL, the ultramarathon runner, the inspiration to millions, that man was, by his own account, born a loser. When they finally call his name, his mother has to nudge him. He walks to the microphone, his mind still floating between his disorienting present and his painful past. He tries to speak, to thank his grandfather, to thank his mother. But when he turns to look at her, the moment that truly changed his life hits him with the force of a tidal wave. And in front of thousands of his brothers and sisters in arms, this hardened warrior, this icon of mental toughness, closes his eyes and sobs. That man is David Goggins. And his story, which he continues in his book Never Finished, isn't really about becoming a hero. It's about something far more fundamental. It's about the war that wages inside every single one of us, the war between who we are and who we could be. Today, we're going to journey into the mind of a man who believes that self-mastery is an unending process, that our job is never, ever finished. We're going to explore his mental lab, a place where he learned to transform his darkest moments into his greatest fuel. By the end of our time together, you will understand the profound secret he uncovered, that our potential isn't something we're born with, it's something we must build, day after day, by winning the war within. Book summary. To understand the man who stood on that stage, we have to go back to the beginning. Goggins describes his entry into this world not as a gift, but as being dealt the worst possible hand. He says every person is issued their own personal piñata at birth. Some are filled with wonderful things. But others, like his, are packed with nightmares. He was born into what he calls a terror dome, ruled by his father, David Goggins. His earliest memories are not of love and safety, but of brutal beatings, of watching his father abuse his mother, his brother, and himself. This constant state of terror, what he calls toxic stress, left deep scars. He developed a stutter. He struggled to learn in school. To survive, he built a shell around himself. He went numb. This numbness was a survival mechanism, a way to endure the beatings and maintain some shred of dignity. But that same numbness followed him long after he and his mother escaped that house. It became his coping mechanism for every failure, every setback, every racist taunt he faced in his new life in a small Indiana town. By the time he was 24 years old, David Goggins was the embodiment of wasted potential. He had tried to join the Air Force pararescue but quit when the training got too hard, specifically his fear of the water. That failure sent him spiraling. He ballooned to nearly 300 pounds, working a $1,000-a-month job spraying for cockroaches in restaurants during the dead of night. He was, in his own words, a shell of a man, with no self-esteem, still haunted by the demons of his past. He felt broken inside. This is where the story of Never Finished truly begins. It begins with a man at rock bottom, consumed by misery, knowing that if he didn't change, he would die a loser. In a moment of desperation, he decides he has to do the one thing he's avoided for over a decade. He has to go back to that haunted house in Buffalo, New York, and look his father in the eye. He tells himself he's looking for answers, for closure. But as he makes that long, silent drive, another voice emerges in his head. For his entire life, one voice had always comforted him. "It's not your fault, David. Look at what you've been through." It was the voice of justification, the voice that allowed him to remain a victim. But now, for the first time, a new voice cut through the noise. It was cold and unflinching. "Roger that. It ain't your fault you were dealt a bad hand. But it is your responsibility. How long will you let your past hold you back?" That question hung in the air as he arrived in Buffalo. The house was the same, a time capsule of dark energy. His father, Trunnis, was charming at first, and for a moment, Goggins found himself laughing, questioning if the monster he remembered was just a figment of his childhood imagination. But as the night wore on, fueled by whiskey, the old Trunnis returned. At a Denny's restaurant in the early hours of the morning, his father began his usual tirade, blaming everyone else for his problems, bad-mouthing Goggins' mother. And in that fluorescent-lit booth, watching his father's rage, Goggins had a devastating realization. He hadn't come to Buffalo for answers. He had come looking for a free pass. He had come to collect more evidence that his failures were all his father's fault. He needed Trunnis to be the devil, because if he was, then David had a lifelong excuse to be a loser. But looking at the pathetic, angry old man in front of him, he saw the truth. His father was flawed, deeply, but he wasn't David's flaw. That second voice on the drive was right. Unless he took responsibility for his own life, for the demons his father had passed on to him, he would remain a victim forever. He drove home from that trip a different person. He understood that our past traumas, our deepest wounds, can become what he calls distracting injuries. Think of a paramedic at a car crash. They see a gruesome, twisted leg, a distracting injury, and might fixate on it. But while they're focused on the broken bone, they miss the real, life-threatening problem, a blocked airway. For years, Goggins had been fixated on the distracting injuries of his past, the abuse, the racism. It blinded him to the things he could control, his weight, his work ethic, his attitude. He realized the clock was ticking on his own life, and he had to stop letting his sad story be the excuse for accomplishing nothing. He had to take ownership. This was the birth of what Goggins calls his mental lab. His entire life became an experiment. He realized his problems weren't physical, they were mental. So, every workout, every study session to pass the military entrance exam, became a test of his mental fortitude. He wasn't trying to build a perfect body, he was trying to build a steel-plated mind. He stopped caring about how he looked and started focusing on how much pressure his mind could withstand. And inside this mental lab, he created an alter ego. He understood that David, the boy who was raised scared and shackled, was not the one who could endure the hell that was to come. He needed someone else. He needed Goggins. Goggins was the savage, the motherfucker powered by the dark side of his soul who refused to be denied. David was the broken kid. Goggins was the warrior who did the hard shit. This separation allowed him to tap into what he calls the dark matter of the mind, all the unused strength and passion that lies dormant within us. One of the most powerful tools he forged in this lab was a technique for neutralizing the past. Many of us are haunted by our darkest moments. We try to bury them, to ignore them. Goggins did the opposite. He took out a simple tape recorder and spoke his trauma into it. He described the beatings, the fear, the humiliation, in graphic detail. And then, he listened to it. Over and over again. He'd walk the streets with his headphones on, listening not to music, but to the scene of his own destruction on repeat. It sounds brutal, and it was. But a strange alchemy happened. The more he listened, the less power the story had over him. The poison was neutralized. The fear and trauma were transformed into pure energy and confidence. He learned that you can't run from your demons. You have to face them, study them, and turn them into fuel. He even started doing this with the hate he received online. He would record himself reading the negative comments, make a mixtape of the hate, and listen to it on his bad days. He realized there is more fuel in hate and doubt than there is in praise and accolades. He learned to never waste a single thing, especially the negative energy that life throws at you. This new mindset, this steel-plated mind, was built on a foundation laid years earlier by his grandfather, Sergeant Jack Gardner. After escaping Buffalo, Goggins and his mother landed on Sergeant Jack's doorstep. There was no pity party. No hugs, no ice cream. The very next morning, before dawn, Sergeant Jack woke him by splashing cold water on his face. There was work to do. Every single day, his grandfather left him a long, itemized task list. Sweep the porches, rake the leaves, pull weeds from the gravel driveway on his hands and knees, wash the cars. At first, Goggins hated him. It felt like he had just escaped one tyrant to be enslaved by another. He saw it as punishment. But slowly, over months of relentless, thankless work, something shifted. He started to take pride in a job well done. He found satisfaction in seeing the car gleam after he washed it, in a perfectly manicured lawn. He learned that when a half-assed job doesn't bother you, it says everything about the kind of person you are. Sergeant Jack never gave him an attaboy. He never paid him an allowance. He was teaching him a far more valuable lesson. The world doesn't owe you sympathy. It owes you nothing. But you owe yourself the pride that comes from maximum effort. He was turning Goggins into a disciple of discipline. That discipline became Goggins's skeleton key. It's what allowed him to lose over 100 pounds in less than 3 months and qualify for Navy SEAL training. But even with all his preparation, he was about to learn one of the most crucial lessons about suffering. During his second Hell Week, the infamous 5.5-day crucible of SEAL training, he was hit by a massive, 6-foot wall of frigid Pacific Ocean water. It slammed him into the sand, and panic set in. The cold, his fear of water, the 130 hours of hell that still lay ahead, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming thought: I don't want to be a Navy SEAL. The dream that had consumed him for over a year was about to be extinguished by a self-sabotaging impulse born of shock and fear. He was a half step from quitting. But in that critical moment, he didn't react. He thought. He took a knee, mentally. He took a deep breath. And in that single second, he made what he calls the 1-second decision. He flashed to his future. If he quit, he'd be sent back to Indiana, back to a life of low-wage jobs, back to being the man he despised. He realized that the life he wanted was on the other side of this temporary suffering. He made the conscious choice to stay in the fight. He saw another trainee, a man named Mora, who was experiencing the same panic in the chow hall. But Mora couldn't make that decision. His emotions controlled him, and he quit. Goggins learned that life isn't built on hours or days, but on the seconds you must win. When the pressure redlines, you have to be able to regain control of your mind in that split second and make a conscious choice, not a default reaction. This collection of tools, the mental lab, the alter ego, the repurposing of pain, the discipline of Sergeant Jack, and the 1-second decision, is what carried Goggins through his legendary military and athletic career. But Never Finished is about what happens next. What happens when the war seems to be over? What happens when the savage becomes comfortable? After the massive success of his first book, Can't Hurt Me, Goggins found himself in a new, unfamiliar territory. He had money. He had respect. He was a sought-after public speaker. And on the day after Christmas in 2018, as he was celebrating his book hitting the bestseller list, his heart suddenly began to race out of control. He was in atrial fibrillation, or AFib. He ended up in the emergency room, terrified. His previous heart surgeries had never scared him, but this was different. He had finally processed his past, told his truth, and found a sense of peace. And right on cue, life threw him a merry fucking Christmas, a brutal reminder that it takes no days off. They had to electrically shock his heart back into rhythm. The experience left him shaken. He felt his savage identity slipping away. He was still working out, but he'd become a part-time savage, a weekend warrior. He was maintaining, not growing. The fire was dying down. Then came an email. An invitation to run the Leadville Trail 100, one of the toughest ultramarathons on the planet. His initial reaction was hesitation. His weak internal dialogue started listing all the reasons not to do it: his heart condition, his busy schedule, the fact that he hadn't raced in years. This is what the average mind does. It finds the excuses. But Goggins recognized the softness. He looked at himself in the mirror and asked, "Is this what the fuck you've turned into?" He knew he had to get back in the fight. He accepted the challenge and threw himself into a grueling training block, running 15 to 25 miles a day in the sweltering East Coast humidity, battling dive-bombing birds and ravenous insects. He ran on empty, purposefully dehydrating himself, pushing his body to find energy where there was none. He was rediscovering the man who, when asked by a baffled driver why he was out running on the hottest day of the year, simply replied, "Because you're not." The Leadville race was a purging of his soul. He faced down false summits, the moments on a climb that trick you into thinking you've reached the top when you're not even close. He learned to stop looking for the end of the suffering and to embrace the struggle as the entire journey. Near the end of the race, a smug runner passed him and made a dismissive comment. In that moment, Goggins unlocked the dog inside him, that primal ferocity that feeds on disrespect. He hunted that man down in the final miles, not out of anger, but as a reminder to himself of the hunger he had been missing. He was a savage reborn. But Leadville was just the beginning. It made him ask a new question. If 100 miles has become accessible to so many, where is the new deep end? The answer was the Moab 240, a monstrous 240-mile race through the Utah desert. This was a new level of fear, a new challenge. His first attempt in 2019 was a catastrophe. His Raynaud's condition caused his hands to freeze, leaving him unable to eat or drink. He and his pacer went 15 miles off course due to a navigation error. He missed a critical dose of his thyroid medication. And ultimately, he developed high-altitude pulmonary edema, a life-threatening condition where his lungs filled with fluid. He was forced to take a DNF, did not finish. For many, this would be the end of the story. But for Goggins, it was the start of the next mission. He refused to be knocked down mentally. He called this the art of getting hit in the mouth. When life delivers a haymaker, you must absorb the blow and immediately re-engage. His race was over, but he created a new purpose: to finish the course anyway, to create an ultimate blueprint of every mistake he made so he could come back and conquer it the next year. He even went back out on the trail after getting out of the hospital to run the final 40 miles, collecting data for his redemption. This experience solidified his foxhole mentality. A foxhole is your inner circle. His crew in Moab never lost faith. When he said he was going back out, they had a look on their faces that said, "What took you so long?" He realized you must be ruthless about who you let into your foxhole. You need people who believe in your quest, not people who give you permission to quit when things get hard. He trained for a year with a singular focus: redemption at Moab. He was in the best shape of his life. And then, another hit. A few months before the 2020 fire season, where he was working as a wildland firefighter, his knee swelled up like a balloon. An MRI revealed it was, in his words, 8 ways fucked. His fire season was over before it began. This is where most stories would end. But Goggins' response to this devastating news was 2 simple words: "Roger that." It's more than just order received. It means, received, order given, expect results. It's an accelerant that bypasses overthinking and stimulates action. He couldn't fight fires, and he couldn't run. So he set a new, audacious goal. He would compete in a 444-mile bike race, the Natchez Trace 444, just a few months away. But then, disaster struck again. The knee didn't heal. A seemingly simple cleanup surgery went horribly wrong. The surgeon, without Goggins' full consent, drilled holes into his bone in a desperate attempt to generate new cartilage. The recovery was excruciating. He went from running 200-mile races to not being able to walk down a flight of stairs. He was told he would never run again. This was the ultimate test. What does the savage do when the physical is taken away? He had to call the biggest audible of his life. He found one of the few surgeons in the world, Drive. Andreas Gamal, who could perform a radical procedure, a high tibial osteotomy. They would have to saw his shin bone, insert a metal plate, and realign his entire leg. There were no guarantees. But it was his only shot. The doctor warned him that even if it was a success, he could do almost anything, he supposed, short of jumping out of planes. The surgery and recovery were brutal. But Goggins was relentless. He had to find his new 100%. He couldn't run, so he got on a stationary bike, every pedal stroke an agony. 13 weeks after having his leg broken and plated back together, he rode those 444 miles in the Natchez Trace, finishing in second place. The fire of his ultimate dream, however, still burned: to become a smoke jumper, an elite airborne wildland firefighter. It was the one goal that had eluded him for years. And it was the one thing the doctor said he likely couldn't do. But Goggins doesn't deal in likelihoods. He deals in outliers. Less than a year after the surgery, he was in Fort Street, John, British Columbia, as a 47-year-old rookie in smoke jumper training, surrounded by men half his age. He was beat to shit, in constant pain, his body bruised and sore every single morning. He struggled with skills that required dexterity in the freezing cold because of his raynos, practicing for hours alone in the snow at night to overcome his weakness. He wasn't the best at everything, but he became the leader of the class, pushing everyone to be better. And then came the day of the first jump. The moment of truth. He knew the landing could shatter his leg and end the dream forever. As he stood in the open door of the plane, 1,500 feet above the earth, he didn't feel fear. He felt peace. He had gotten this far. He pushed out, his parachute opened, and as the ground rushed up to meet him, he prepared for the impact. He hit the ground, rolled, and felt a bolt of pain, but the leg held. He had done it. He had defied the medical mind, defied the odds, defied his own body. He had jumped his first fire. As he floated down under that canopy, looking at the fire below, he was overwhelmed with a sense of glory. Not for the outcome, but for the valiance of the attempt. It was the culmination of a life spent refusing to accept limitations. He realized that the goal was never just to be a SEAL, or an ultra runner, or a smoke jumper. The goal was to wring every last drop out of his soul, to find out what was truly possible. To constantly seek that thin atmospheric line between blue and black, the place where greatness is found. The work, he knew, would never be finished. And that was the whole point. Commentary. What a journey. When you close a book like Never Finished, you're left with a feeling that's less about inspiration and more about a profound sense of responsibility. The central message that echoes long after the last page is a challenging one: comfort is the enemy of growth. Goggins shows us that the human spirit doesn't thrive on easy streets, it's forged in the crucible of adversity. So many of us, especially as we get older and achieve a certain level of success, start looking for the smooth road. We think we've earned it. We build routines, we seek stability, and we avoid the things that make us uncomfortable. Goggins' story serves as a powerful, almost jarring, wake-up call. His AFib episode, his knee surgery, these weren't just random misfortunes. They were life's way of testing him precisely when he was at his most comfortable. He teaches us that satisfaction is a hop step away from complacency, and complacency is where potential goes to die. The real war isn't just getting out of the gutter, it's staying out of the comfortable armchair once you've made it. But what I find most powerful isn't just his relentless drive, it's the practicality of his mental toolkit. He gives us concrete strategies for this internal war. The idea of distracting injuries, that we fixate on past wounds while ignoring the present problems we can actually solve, is a concept that applies to everyone. We all have a story we tell ourselves about why we can't move forward. Goggins forces us to ask, is that story a reason, or is it an excuse? His 1-second decision is another masterclass in emotional regulation. In moments of extreme stress, our instinct is to react, to flee. He teaches us to pause, take a single breath, and connect with our future self. To ask, if I quit now, what happens next? It's a simple, profound technique for replacing panicked reaction with conscious choice. And perhaps the most accessible tool is his practice of recording his own self-talk. It's a brilliant method for holding ourselves accountable. How many of us have an internal monologue filled with whining, excuses, and self-doubt? We'd be embarrassed if anyone else heard it. Goggins says, you should hear it. Record it. Listen to it. Cringe at it. And then use that feeling to rewrite the narrative. So, how can we start applying these ideas today, without having to run 240 miles? Here are a few simple actions to consider. First, the next time you feel the pull of procrastination, that voice telling you to skip the gym or put off that important project, take out your phone and record yourself making your excuses out loud. Then, play it back. Just listen. Often, hearing your own weakness spoken into the world is enough to shatter its power. Second, identify one distracting injury in your own life. It could be a past failure, a resentment, or a what-if that you constantly revisit. For the next week, every time that thought comes to mind, I want you to audibly say, Roger, that, and immediately pivot your focus to a small, productive task you can complete in the next 5 minutes. It could be answering an email, cleaning your desk, or doing a set of push-ups. You are training your brain to stop living in the past and start acting in the present. Third, think about your foxhole. Who is the one person in your life who, with the best of intentions, consistently gives you a pass? The one who says, "Oh, you're too tired, just take a day off." For the next month, make a conscious decision to not discuss your biggest goals with that person. Protect your ambition from well-meaning comfort. Never Finished is not a self-help book in the traditional sense. It's not about finding happiness or balance. It's a boot camp for the mind, a field manual for discovering what lies on the other side of your perceived limits. It reminds us that our potential is not a fixed quantity we are born with. It is a dynamic force that we can expand every single day through discipline, resilience, and an unwavering belief in our own ability to try one more time. That was a deep dive into Never Finished by David Goggins. We've journeyed through the core of his philosophy today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary, no matter how detailed, can only be a map. The real treasure is found when you walk the path yourself. The true power of a book like this isn't just in the concepts, but in the quiet moments when one of Goggins' stories hits you in a way you didn't expect, connecting with a struggle you thought was yours alone. This summary is your guide to decide if this journey is one you need to take. If anything we've talked about today has sparked a fire in you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning, it's an experience that can fundamentally change the way you see your own pain, your own potential, and your own path forward. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you a new perspective, please do me a small favor and hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep challenging ourselves and growing together.